Welcome to Bunny Trails, a whimsical adventure of idioms and other turns of phrase. I'm Dan Pugh.
And I'm Shauna Harrison. Each week, we take an idiom or other turn of phrase and try to tell the story from its entry into the English language to how it's used today. Sometimes, life can feel a bit like being in a circus, with ongoing demands, distractions, and expectations. You may even feel as though you must perform tricks and maybe even literally jump through hoops.
I don't like the idea of literally jumping through hoops, but I think that I might prefer the literal jumping through hoops as opposed to the figurative jumping through hoops, which just feels tedious.
Yeah. We invented a word for it and everything. Oxford English Dictionary tells us jumping through hoops refers to a circular ring, often with paper stretched over it, through which acrobats or performing animals leap. It's also figurative, especially in to go or jump through hoops, which means, quote, to undergo an ordeal or trial, end quote.
See, this is interesting to me because I think of jumping through hoops as like having to push through unnecessary burdens.
Yes.
But the concept of undergoing an ordeal or trial is, while synonymous, they mean similar things. That is not how I think I've used jumping through hoops. So maybe I've used this phrase wrong, or maybe it's just shifted and the OED hasn't caught up to it, or maybe it's used both ways.
It is actually, in fact, we'll hear about it, but it's a nuanced phrase that is kind of up to the speaker and the hearer, I think. This phrase can be traced back to the 1700s, when the circus became popular in Europe and North America. The concept of animals jumping through hoops was likely not a new practice, but the widespread impact of circuses would have contributed to the phrase's popularity and this idea of jumping through hoops. We see the phrase used in the literal sense in John Trussler's 1790 work titled The Progress of Man and Society, From the Cradle to the Grave and From the Infancy of Things to Their Present State, for the use of schools.
I still like our womb to tomb better, even though I know that that's not
right.
That's not a historical phrase. But womb to tomb, I like it better than cradle to grave.
Womb to tomb is fantastic. Here's an excerpt. Quote, "But man, by his exertions, has by a kind of education taught some animals to perform wonderful things, and make their sagacity wear the appearance of reason. Monkeys have been taught to wait at table, dogs to fetch and carry, bears to dance, horses to jump through hoops suspended in the air, birds to fire guns, and the like," end quote. One, I think it's funny that was thrown on at the end, birds to fire guns.
That is such an interesting, it is such an interesting twist of what birds do. Like, normally they're trying to run from guns. In 1790, obviously I know they have firearms back then, but they're different kinds of weapons than we have now. But, that's, I think about it in my head. I see, like from our episode, Canary in the Coal Mine. So I imagine the anthropomorphic Tweety bird character with like an AK-47 or something smoking a cigar. And I'm just like, this isn't how it's supposed to be.
That's not really. Yeah. This usage was talking about the literal jumping of hoops, but the passage isn't describing specific activities, nor is it a narration of a particular event. It's talking about the kinds of feats that humans have taught to animals. Jumping through hoops was representative of the entire idea of doing something challenging or unnecessarily complicated to achieve an outcome or to impress people.
Ha. Unnecessarily complicated. That is, as someone who spent over 20 years working for the United States government in various levels, I can tell you that they're jumping through hoops and bureaucratic red tape and those types of concepts seem to me as unnecessarily complicated steps.
Yes. So because of this, it's difficult to pin down a date for when the phrase began being used solely in its figurative form, partially because it's still being used both ways today. Cirque du Soleil, they jump through hoops all the time. During the 1800s, the phrase continued to primarily have a literal usage in discussing this type of performance. So it was applied broadly, but still literal. Here's an example from the Wheeling Daily Register, April 5th, 1871, out of Wheeling, West Virginia. Quote, "The wonderful Cynocephalus, a gray, malicious-looking, educated monkey who rides on horseback after the ordinary fashion of circus riders in a New York circus. One who has witnessed his skillful horse-monkeyship states that, though trained to walk on his hind legs, he evidently pines for all fours and has a constant tendency to indulge surreptitiously in that mode of locomotion. The cynocephalus is just as expert at riding a horse bareback and jumping through hoops and over banners as any other knight of the arena in spangles and tights." End quote.
That's really interesting that this monkey was called a cynocephalus. So I assume he must have had kind of a dog-shaped head, because that's traditionally what that word would mean, is like dog-headed, and
Yeah.
it's from like a mythological race of like dog-headed humans walking around, right? Kind of like what we
Right.
oftentimes see Egyptian gods in the Egyptian pantheon depicted as, with either like heads of jackals or heads of dogs or different things.
Right. And, I tried to see if it was this particular monkey or maybe it was a breed of monkey that they were using for that purpose, and that was why they called it that. And I could not find anything concrete about it. But I also, part of me wonders if it's just because he was on his hind legs that they felt like it made his head look different. It's hard to say.
I don't know. Interesting. Or maybe they just didn't know. Maybe they didn't assume anybody would know what it meant, and they thought it sounded cool.
That's also
Which,
possible.
frankly, quite possible.
There are some usages from this same time frame that seem more figurative. Here's one from the Athens Post, dated May 8th, 1874, out of Athens, Tennessee.
That was not the Athens I thought you were going for. I don't know why, but that was not the Athens I was expecting. Fair enough.
The piece is titled "A Pious Equestrian." Quote, "A young woman who rides horseback in a circus has been interviewed by a reporter of the Baltimore American, and to his inquiry whether circus people have any religious feeling, was told that jumping through hoops did not prevent her from trying to do good, and that she was a member of a church and in good standing." End quote.
Yeah, that one is rather ambiguous. It's
Right.
unclear whether she means the literal jumping through hoops or
Those sorts of activities generally
Yeah.
or something. Yeah.
Interesting.
Up next, we have a very clear figurative usage of the phrase. This comes from a work by Pelham Grenville Woodhouse, known as P.G. Woodhouse. This is from the 1917 work, The Man with Two Left Feet and Other Stories. Quote, "It was his business to make money and, when called upon, to jump through hoops and sham dead at the bidding of his wife and daughter May." End quote. So there you go.
All right.
He was jumping through hoops from whatever they wanted.
I felt like that. For a long time I felt like that. Only it wasn't a wife or daughter that were making me jump through the hoops. It was
your true
bosses.
spouse, the government. No.
The bosses.
The next item comes from the Seward Daily Gateway, September 28th, 1926, out of Seward, Alaska. This one involves a supposed scandal between a prominent evangelist and a man who had worked for her. And she is the one being quoted here. Quote, "Just like so many nice little doggies are these Carmel witnesses who are trained to jump through hoops, and they had 5 months to train them." End quote. So here's the dish, right? Is that these witnesses said that she was living with this man who was working for her in like an inappropriate manner.
Oh, so
They were not-
okay,
yeah.
So she is living
She's an
living in
evangelist, and
sin.
so- yeah.
All right,
Yeah.
and living with a man.
Yeah, who worked for her. I think that was the thing that was significant. Like he worked at the property where
I
she...
bet
don't
it
know.
wasn't
It
the
really-
significant part. The
who
fact that it was
knows?
just a
Who
woman and a
knows?
man who are not married, living together,
So,
living in sin, like an
I-
adult woman cannot make her own decisions
guess.
about what's appropriate or not.
I
1926,
think part of it
get
was
your
that
act
she
together.
was a big evangelist, and so they kind of were
Well, in
people were
fairness,
grumpy about
depending,
it.
I don't know what she was evangelizing, but usually when we see the word in English, it is frequently an evangelist is talking about someone who is very outspoken about morality, which is defined through a religion. And oftentimes in the US at least, and this was out of Alaska, so it's hard to know if it was US based or, indigenous Alaskan or Canadian influenced, but oftentimes that is Christianity that would be referenced there. So I don't know what it is to this point, but it would be in a lot of sects of Christianity, it would be inappropriate for a man and a woman to cohabitate if they were in a relationship but not married.
Right.
So I guess if she was pitching all of that, then and then doing it anyway, then that would be rather hypocritical, which
Right. Maybe that was
yeah,
where
and
people
that is
were.
still newsworthy now when a pastor or someone is being hypocritical about the tenets of their faith and they get busted at it. It is
Makes
newsworthy,
the
right?
news. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Got some good juicy gossip there.
Juicy 1926 gossip.
Right. Up next is a panel from the comic strip Joe Jinx in the Waterbury Democrat, March 2nd, 1937 edition, out of Waterbury, Connecticut. In the strip, a woman is trying to stop another woman from flirting with her guy. The final panel depicts her thinking, quote, "He may balk at leaving New York just now, but I can handle him. A smile, a tear perhaps, and I can make him jump through hoops," end quote. Thinks she's got a way to make him do what she wants. The last item is an ad from the Evening Star, February 10th, 1950, out of Washington, D.C. Quote, "I'll jump through hoops for your business," says Jerry Slagle of Old Dominion Motors. "Ever notice all the happy folks driving new Hudsons away from my place? Know why? They wanted big money for their trade-ins, and brother, they got it. I'm not Santa Claus, but I'll lose money to make friends. Come on over and wheel and deal with me. I'll make it easy for you to own this new Hudson. Only $666 down." End quote. I thought that was funny. Like Old Dominion Motors.
I think we've referenced Old Dominion Motors
Have
before.
we? It
Yeah.
sounded familiar, and I didn't know if it's just because I'd seen it in papers, as I've researched. But
Yeah. Also, Hudson was one of the cars in the Cars movie, right? Wasn't he Doc? Like that was Doc
oh,
Hudson,
Doc
right?
Hudson, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
the one that well, I don't want to spoil it now, but
Oh
the
dear.
one that is I think the judge and sentences Lightning McQueen to fix the road after he tears it up driving through the
Yeah, is
town,
that
kind of thing.
okay?
Yeah,
Wow,
pretty
you
sure that
remember?
was.
Oh, you remember that much
I
of the
just
movie?
it's just the Hudson thing that popped it up, and I
It
was
just
like,
like brought
wow,
it all
wait a
back
minute.
for you.
Yeah, it did. It did. Yeah, it just that's my memory is so weird because some people remember lots of things and then you can just say it and then it pulls it back for them and they're like, oh yeah, let me
Mm-hmm.
find that file in my brain. And for me, it is almost always either musical or it is some sort of a key phrase that then allows me to be able to get. It's almost like I have all these files, but they have passwords and I don't know what the passwords are, but someone else will say the password and then
Brings it
whether I
back.
like it or not, there is that memory.
That's awesome. I always say that mine is more like an old-fashioned card catalog, but somebody like dumped them all out and scattered
And
them all
scatter them all
over,
around.
and so they just kind of jump from one to the other. Yeah.
Yeah, having known you for a long time, I do believe that might be an accurate assessment of what it appears from the outside your brain works. Yeah.
We have several modern uses to cover, and we'll get to those right after we say thank you to our sponsors.
This episode is sponsored by our amazing patrons on Patreon. And the cool thing about Patreon is it is 100% free to join the Bunny Trails community. We have new things every weekday on the feeds. On Mondays, we have a conversation about what movies, shows, books, podcasts, and whatever else everyone is enjoying. Tuesdays see early access to the week's podcast. Wednesdays have all the links, books, songs, and other content mentioned in the week's episode. Thursday has patrons-only polls. And Fridays are our lightly edited, behind-the-scenes video featuring all the cut content, goofs, and bonus facts you could imagine.
We've got some other pretty cool stuff too, like original digital artwork once a month made by me, and direct access to talk with us. No algorithms getting in the way of what we see or don't see. Plus, you can get awesome name recognition like Pat Rowe does every episode. And our top spot is currently occupied by the amazing Mary Halsig Lopez. You can join the Bunny Trails community for free at Bunny Trails Pod on Patreon.
That's patreon.com/bunnytrailspod.
Jump Through Hoops is a 2018 song by the Mighty Mighty Boss Tones. Here are some of the lyrics. Quote, "No time to stop and assess, can't let it grind to a halt, can't stop and look at the mess, and then find out it's my fault. I can't stop for a single minute, I know hell well, I'm living in it. No time to stop at all, I gotta jump through the hoops." End quote.
It's a good usage, good figurative usage of this phrase in the
Yeah.
way that I imagine it.
Yep. Another hoop to jump through is a pastel on paper painting by Joanne Renner of the United States. It was originally created in 2019. Here's what Renner shares about the piece. Quote, "Part of my series of pastels and oils using surrealist images based on ancient sites. These are a metaphor for mental health issues like anxiety, depression, and PTSD. This image is about that feeling when you get so tired of jumping through hoops to accomplish something." End quote. The painting does depict a surrealist landscape. It almost appears to be a blend of a place in the clouds, but also a place long deserted. There are stone steps that lead to a circular arch, a hoop. It has the feel of a garden sculpture, but on a grand scale. I think it's a really intriguing painting.
This painting, when I look at it, makes me think of if someone with limited experience, right? Maybe someone from an agrarian culture went across the mountain and found a Stargate.
That's awesome.
That's what this makes me think of. And then they went back and then painted it so people could see what it looked like. But, they had to go all the way back across the mountain, so they don't remember it exactly, right?
Yeah.
So they're kind of painting from memory. And this, because there's there's these steps that are kind of leading up to it. And then it looks very much like a Stargate,
It does look like a
but
Stargate.
it's obviously made of the same type of materials. But when they're walking back, someone's brain is going to fill in the materials that are familiar to them, right? So they're just gonna, that's what this image makes me think of. You can check it out. It'll be on the Patreon. It's on the public side, so you don't necessarily have to be a member to see it or anything. You can just go in, and it's patreon.com/bunnytrailspod.
Jumping Through Hoops is a 2023 commercial by Tangerine Bank. The description reads, quote, "Hoop dramatization. Do not attempt. It's taxing, cumbersome, and frankly really annoying. Instead, take a moment and ask yourself, why does this hoop even exist? And is there a better way around it? We find that the answers are almost always, it shouldn't, and yes." End quote. So the commercial, the commercial's a sort of dystopian style short film almost that depicts humans in a kind of gray world in business attire. They're shuffling through offices and down sidewalks through subways. All the while, they must stop and climb through various hoops, like literal hoop after hoop.
So it's basically a real depiction of most of our lives going to work and then
those day-to-day
doing things.
Yeah,
regardless of who we work for. Yeah.
It's terrifying.
And that I should note, I really enjoy the work I do now. When you are doing a job that you don't love, that what you've described is very much how I remember it feeling.
Yeah. People also describe paying their bills that way, or it's like us. I have to go here and do this and then do that, and I'm paying you, that kind of thing. So
yeah, you know what? You say that. I pay all of my bills now are paid online through pre-set up agreements. There's literally nothing that I have to go in and pay. And there was a time when I literally had to go and give money or write checks. So for those of you listening, checks were these little pieces of paper that you wrote things down on, and they acted like money, and you just gave it to someone, and then they were like, "Yeah, this is good enough. It's just a piece of paper that you were like, I owe you $5,000. Please give this to my bank, and they'll pay you." That's pretty much what it was.
Ridiculous.
Well, Yeah, but that's how it worked, and
Yeah,
that's how the first credit cards worked too. So Diners Club, that's how that worked too. Only it was cardboard instead of paper.
amazing.
Anyway, my point is, you used to have to go out to all these different places and do that. So, like you're describing having to go to all these different places, but yeah, I'd have to go to the grocery store because that was closer to pay my electric bill, and I could go there and pay my
Yeah.
electric bill. But then I had to go to the phone company location to pay my phone bill, or the other options were writing checks and mailing them, and
Hmm.
then hoping they arrive before the due date, right? And so
And
then it's like,
after the paycheck that you needed to be in there.
right. So
Yeah.
yeah, even 30 years ago, the difference in how we pay and how we receive money, and how much easier it is for me to stay on top of my money now than it was back then, because I'd have like 17 checks out to all these different utilities and services and things. And so I'm trying to be like, okay, well, this is how much I've written in checks. And I don't know when all of them are going to come out of my bank account.
Right.
So I have to have
Just
this
like
much in my
guessing.
account, which means I have only this much left, but I need to get gas. So can I get gas and hope that this paycheck comes in before the electric bill comes out? The floating the check kind of concept. It's
Right.
like you're just hoping that they haven't cashed it before you got the next. What a mess that was.
Yeah, my goodness. It also makes me like realize I maybe shouldn't complain about the self checkout because I have to push 4 buttons before I can. I was like, maybe I should let that one go.
That's true. They do pay people to do those though.
That's true.
So I guess to each your own.
Yeah, fair. Jumping through hoops, avoiding introvert burnout in the corporate world is a 2023 article by Leslie Tate that was posted on LinkedIn. Here's how the article begins. Quote, for introverts, the corporate world can be a daunting place. The stereotypical image of a leader is often that of an extroverted, gregarious individual who thrives on social interaction, full of energy, and loves being the center of attention. It comes from a mostly unintentional bias that extroverts are somehow better than us. Unfortunately, this can create a situation where you feel you must jump through extrovert hoops to prove your worth at work and earn a promotion. End quote.
Yep.
Fair. Yeah.
Totally fair.
100%.
I get it.
All the extroverts in the room are like, yeah.
Yeah. I get, and as someone, I'm a very outgoing introvert, so I would be, for people who are misusing the term, I could be classified as an extrovert. I'm very outgoing when
Mm,
I am supposed to be on, so to speak.
yeah.
But I'm also, when I walk away from there, like I get my motivation and my rejuvenation from being by myself and not being around other people. So, and I know we've talked about this on the podcast before, but that whole concept of like, it is a drain to be on like that. It is a drain for me to be outgoing. And while I don't mind doing it because it is, I'm capable of it, not everybody is capable of it if they're an introvert, but I can only do it for so long before I really need to take a break. And I've always been like that. I didn't always recognize it, but I've always been like that. And so the long hours, long shifts, or doing a double shift or something like that, definitely by the second shift, I was noticing that yeah, this got harder and harder and harder for me,
Right.
jumping through those extrovert hoops.
Yes, for sure. And I totally feel that the way that you described that of being on or whatever. And it's like, because that's very much, I'm like, I'm a well trained introvert, is what I am, not a, not an extrovert. Hallmark has a little figurine for sale that features Peanuts, Snoopy, and Charlie Brown. Snoopy is shown running down a small track, at the end of which he jumps through a hoop being held by Charlie Brown. The side of the figurine reads, quote, a good friend will always jump through hoops for you, end quote. I feel like I'm torn on this one, but I think I'm like, if I'm just going to go with the feel good message they were trying to go with on
Yeah,
that,
I like
it's
that.
sweet.
That's fine.
Because
I
they
want
will. They'll
I
go,
want
they'll do
them
the extra stuff.
I don't want them to jump through hoops of my own making, but if other people are putting hoops around, the good friend will be there with you, and they're willing to go through a little bit of stuff to make sure that they're there. And I like
Yeah,
that idea.
good point. I come with hoops.
Shauna, you just have to
Hoops come
have to
standard.
wear a name badge that says "Warning, I come with hoops. You'll have to jump through to be friends with me."
Sorry, I cannot help it. I don't know how to take them down.
They're surgically attached and I can't remove them.
Jumping Through Hoops is a book by Betsy Golden Kellum that is set to be published in June of 2025. Here's a part of the synopsis from the publisher. Quote, Jumping Through Hoops reveals the hidden history of early female circus performers, boundary-breaking women like Lavinia Warren, known as the Queen of Beauty, Millie Christine McCoy, the two-headed nightingale, and Patty Astley, the mother of the modern circus. These astounding female and gender non-conforming artists wrestled snakes, performed magic tricks with electricity, and walked across waterfalls on tightropes, shattering taboos by performing in public at a time when respectable women were mostly confined to their homes. End quote.
That will be a really interesting book.
Yeah.
And so it's scheduled to be published in June of 2025.
Sounds fascinating. And this author, she's described as being a different. She writes from a different perspective. So
yeah. So if
very
you are
cool.
looking for a book for your book club, this might be a great one.
Jump through hoops is a phrase that perfectly captures the frustration of navigating unnecessary challenges or red tape. It's relatable and has stood the test of time for good reason. But let's be honest, while it's a great expression, life is better when you're not living this experience. If you can avoid the hoops altogether, you're probably in a situation where things are smoother, simpler, and a bit more rewarding. That's about all we have for today. If you have any thoughts on the show or pop culture references we should have included, reach out to us on Patreon. That's patreon.com/bunnytrailspod, or comment on our website, bunnytrailspod.com.
All right. It is patrons poll time. Recently, we asked our patrons, would you rather live in a tree house or a cave home? The winner was... I would play the little drum roll. We have it right here, So I would play it, but
It's too long.
It just goes on like a half of a second too long. It's so weird. Anyway, cave home.
Okay. Cave home. Jeez. I like both of these ideas. It's like visiting the elves and the hobbits in The Lord of the Rings.
Oh, that's interesting. I was also going to use a Lord of the Rings reference to describe my answer.
That's
well done,
awesome.
Shauna.
Perfect. Well, Jan shared, quote, cave, constant temperature all year, bat friends equals less bugs, cool rock formations, tree house has a potential to fall in a storm, hard to heat and cool, end quote. Man, Jan always makes such good practical points every time.
Very good point. Cheryl adds this, quote, I like the idea of a tree house, but I'm afraid of heights, so I'll stick with the cave, end quote.
I didn't even think about that. Well, I'm not afraid of heights, but...
Yeah, I bet a treehouse would be beautiful, and I love that idea better than like from a aesthetic viewpoint. But I'm with Cheryl about heights, so it would have to be a cave for me. And honestly, hobbit houses are pretty awesome, and they are basically caves. So I think that that's a thing that we should keep in mind and remember.
They're like cozy caves.
Mm-hmm.
Warning: this pod is for nerds.
Well, as a reminder, our silly polls mean absolutely nothing and are not scientifically valid. And patrons of all levels, including our free tiers, can take part. Head over to patreon.com/bunnytrailspod to take this week's poll.
Is that the one you were trying to do?
Nope. I forgot that I can't. Yeah, I had to switch over to get to the warning one because I normally just add that after the fact when I use it. But now I have to go in and hang on. Let me go back to the right soundboard options.
Like, what's our next poll going to be about? That's
well,
my face
interesting.
is so red from laughing so much.
Thanks for joining us. We will talk to you again next week. Until then, remember, words belong to their users.